Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good, straightforward topic for you today. Let's do it. Serious. What's the scariest sound you have ever heard? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe.
One thing my grandmother did when she was near the end of her dementia was to call out, "Mama, Mama, Mama," long and drawn out like this. She passed in 2007, and now my mom lives with us, and she is suffering with dementia. I awakened one night by the same long drawn out, "Mama." I woke up in the middle of the night with my elderly neighbor crying and asking for help because she had just found her husband's body in their house. It made me horrifically sad, and when I finally went back to bed, I couldn't let go of my wife, fearing the day this might happen to one of us. Possums are very cute and fluffy and look quite innocent, but when they see another possum, they growl and scream like a demon. When you don't know about it or just forget, there's always a moment of, what the effing F are monsters actually real and outside my house? I'm gonna effing die. When I was about 8, I saw a classmate get hit by a car at pickup. All ended okay. She fractured her pelvis but survived, thank God, for 40K zones around schools. The screams of her brother and mother as it happened, who must have thought they were watching her die, I can still hear and see it. By far the scariest and most heartbreaking sound I've ever heard. A CNC machine I was operating made a horrifying screeching noise as it dropped a 10-inch saw blade and fired it at me. Nearly lost my leg that day. It missed the main artery in my leg by 2 millimeters. I still get PTSD dreams when I hear it screech, bang, and it whistling toward and through me. My husband and I were awakened by a thunderstorm so loud and physical that we thought it was an earthquake, and a strong one. It was extremely loud and shook the house and everything in it, and the rumble that woke us up lasted for probably 10 seconds. It was such a violent shake, I was thinking, this will be the earthquake that kills us. I swore that the ground was going to open. It took several seconds to realize what it was. I only have experienced thunder like that a few other times in my life, and I grew up in a high-altitude part of the Pacific Northwest. I was standing in the middle of Death Valley at midnight several months ago, no light or anything else around me. As I was taking pictures of the Milky Way, I suddenly heard footsteps approaching. Grabbed my camera and turned to run. Ended up being another photographer who had been sleeping near me, then woke up and came to talk with me. Took a good 2 hours for my heart to calm down. Hearing my 7-year-old scream and wailing from their room at 2 a.m., that eerie sound of fear and despair and hopelessness calling for someone to stop whatever is going on, hearing it come closer and closer before you can even get out of the covers to check on them. Fortunately, it turned out their hand had fallen asleep and they thought it was a dead hand stuck in the pajamas. Stopped screaming as we were yelling, What? Oh, it's just my hand. Still the scariest sound I ever heard. I have nightmares about it sometimes.
This evokes an almost instantaneous reaction, at least for me. Just reading what you wrote had me a little upset. So, yeah, that would be just about it.
When I was 13, I was lying in bed trying to fall asleep. I went to grab a drink of water from the bottle next to my bed, and my elbow bumped the wall next to it by accident. Almost immediately, a singular bump responded from the other side of the wall. I froze, stared at the wall, and then knocked twice in the same spot. 2 knocks responded a moment later. The other side of the wall was our lounge room. There was no one in there, and I know because I didn't get another wink of sleep until the sun rose. Still freaks me out, and I occasionally knock the walls of my bedroom now, hoping I don't hear anything knock back. I was at a decently large casino, very busy inside and pretty loud music with their speakers going on and a lot of other people talking and yelling. Now, I was directly in the middle of a casino, but I could hear outside the walls what sounded like somebody was revving their truck engine like some douche, which is crazy because there's no way that I should be able to hear that from where it was located. Then, all of a sudden, the entire building started shaking back and forth. Turned out that revving noise was a tornado, and it hit the building. Luckily, it was a small tornado, but it was random, and the weather stations didn't send out warning signals until after it was already on the ground. Normally, when we do lockdown drills at school, A, we know in advance, and B, the principal just comes on and says lockdown drill, and we go into the mode. One day, the school's deputy came on the PA out of nowhere and said, "We're under lockdown," and bleeped the bell ring. The kids looked at my co-teacher and me and were like, "Is this for real?" I had no idea, but went into the groove, got them into the back of the room, etc. At some point, I announced, "We are not dying today, kids, so don't worry." One kid said, "You for real?" And I believe I replied, "You bet your ass, now get back there." I picked up a desk and stood there, ready to throw it. And that was the day I almost heaved a desk at my principal as he keyed in to make sure we were following lockdown protocols. I will never forget the sound of the deputy's voice and that bleep of the ring. They did address it at a staff meeting as kind of an oops, our bad, but come on, let the teachers know, please. I was camping, and in the middle of the night I woke up at about 2 a.m. to the sounds of the thermal box with food and ice being opened right in front of my tent. At the time I thought it was a bear because there were some bear sightings in that place, and I was afraid the bear would want to get inside the tent. But the next day, I found out my friend who was in the tent beside me was the one who opened the box to go get something, lol.
Yeah, typically it's going to be somebody you went camping with that makes a noise like that, but so glad it worked out and you didn't get attacked by a bear.
Me and my husband used to live with grandparents in Mexico, and one night while living there, we both woke up at the same time for some reason. It was silent, and then all of a sudden we heard really loud, heavy breathing coming from outside our window. It sounded like it was coming from a large creature that was angry or that might be looking for its prey. Our room was on the second floor, so it just makes no sense. My entire province went blackout during a heavy windstorm, and I was sitting playing some emulator on my laptop when I hear this shriek for help outside. I jump up and grab a power bank with a flashlight, turn it on, and run outside. A woman tells me her friend's daughter is having a seizure, but there are no available ambulances. So, in the next process of leaving her house, she locked herself out. 5 college kids from next door standing looking confused as well, so I offered to break a window, and she says please do. I ran inside and grabbed a frying pan and bashed out the glass of the back window and ripped the frame off the house and unlocked her door. Sent her on her way, and the kids from next door and I spent about an hour outside boarding up her window, and it turned out none of them knew each other because they were renting bedrooms. 6 of us are just standing there in 100 to 150 km/h winds, hoping people don't think we're breaking into this lady's house while we hammer boards to her house. The sound of the desperation in her voice as she screamed was chilling. This wasn't the scariest one, but I have one more story. I was crashing on my ex's couch for a few days, and while she was at work, I was home that day. I was just starting to wake up, but not fully lucid, and I hear this super loud laughter of a little kid. So I jolt up, terrified that the door had been unlocked and someone's kid had wandered in. I look around and see nothing, but a few minutes later, hear this kid again, and notice the door to the upstairs neighbor's laundry room is where the sound was coming from. For whatever reason, the house was not very insulated for sound, so the voice traveled really well into that part of the apartment we were in, so it was as loud as if they were right next to me, which was the scariest part. 2 a.m., February 2005, Tanana Valley, Alaska. I was woken up by what sounded like a woman screaming, but the pitch kept rising outside of what would be considered a normal register. Without a break for breath, the scream turned into a series of very loud, quick, percussive sounds like chattering of teeth. From there, it transitioned again without pause into a terrifyingly low guttural roar. A couple minutes later, I heard the same call, cry, noise returned, but from much further away. The near and far sounds went back and forth every couple of minutes for around half an hour, then stopped. I can't put a name to the noise, but have lived here my whole life, 38 male, and never heard anything like it before or since. The sound of gas being released by the body after my dad died unexpectedly My mom had asked me to pick out a shirt for the funeral home because she wasn't up to it. He was in the bedroom, and it sounded like a breath. I had a pretty visceral reaction. It freaked me out so much I refused to go back into that room until the undertaker had taken him away. The doctor who confirmed the death could have warned us. Sometimes dead bodies make sounds. I'm a former trauma RN and an Air Force officer, and I've spent some time downrange Afghanistan. For obvious reasons, Afghanistan has a way of putting certain fears into you on its own. Those fears, when combined with certain sounds, may go up or down. For me, the sounds of jets in Afghanistan was comforting. It meant help was there, so I loved it. But the sound of a jet is not something that is typically anything other than alarming. Last year I was back home, here in Eugene, Oregon, and the Ducks were playing their Veterans Day game. I was out at the Saturday market when an F-22 flew over the game for the opening. It was so low and so fast that the sound was impossible to hear until you already saw the thing leaving. It scared me so thoroughly and so immediately that I turned around and grabbed the first person in my vicinity and started immediately crying into their chest. It took about 2 seconds to feel super effing cowardly for this, especially to a stranger, and then I realized this man was also crying. I pulled back a little and looked at him, and he was an older dude. I said, "I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened." Before I could finish apologizing, he said, "Don't apologize, son. Thank you for your service." And he pointed to his army unit patch on his jacket from Vietnam. He said, "Most people will never know that their soul can stay scared their entire life." We grabbed a beer and talked shop for a bit. I'm so thankful for that man. I feel like such a chump, and he made me feel seen. When I was a kid, I was staying home alone, and I heard the dog door open and close a few times from the hallway. I looked around to see all of our animals within visual range of me, and someone would have to open the door to get into the garage to get to our dog door, so probably no wild or neighbor's animals. I grabbed a Swiss Army knife and started to stalk my house ready to stab a burglar. We lived in a somewhat nice residential area, but we were on the handful of streets that were very noticeably outside the gate part of the community, as if someone was saying, "Here's where the rich peoples live, and here are the houses you're allowed to rob." Houses got burglarized on my street at least once a year. I was shot at once, and the sound of a bullet passing close by is pretty distinctive, but I didn't realize what had happened until later, so I wasn't actually frightened by it. The most terrified I've been from a sound was when I was working graveyard security at an old army fort converted into a school. Part of the job was to walk through the building every hour or so and check the doors that are supposed to be locked. During one check, I stopped midway to use the bathroom, and while I was washing my hands, I heard a sound part of the way between a moan and a roar. That was exactly the sound you'd expect some shambling undead monstrosity to make, and it came from right outside the bathroom door. I stood there frozen in terror for a good 5 minutes, still holding a paper towel. When I didn't hear any other sounds, I turned the lights off to get accustomed to the dark, slowly opened the door, and sprinted for the exit. I didn't go in another building the rest of the night. 2 days later, I was back for a day shift on the weekend. I'd had some time to consider what had happened, so I went back to the same bathroom and flushed the toilet. A minute later, the old water pipes made the same noises again. When Pan Am Flight 103 was bombed and crashed into Lockerbie, I saw a clip on the news of the mother of one of the students on board. She had been at the airport waiting for the plane and had been told about the crash. She was lying on the floor thrashing around screaming, "My baby! My baby!" I couldn't believe the network, ABC I think, aired that. The most painful, horrific moment of that woman's life, broadcast for millions to see.
Well, if you want to connect to your viewers instantly, you show something like that. Was it morally right? I mean, I guess it depends on that individual, but it did show the anguish of the story. But I could see both sides of this one here. So,
the sound of the "you're about to be gassed" alarm on board one of the vessels I've been on. I was doing some checks down inside one of the cargo holds on board my vessel. This is as far down as you're able to get without crawling inside the actual tanks on board the ship. Well below the water outside, about 6 sets of stairs, plus a tall ladder to get down there. Plus, I was walking on the opposite side of the cargo hold from where the ladder was. I'm walking throughout the hold, checking some fuel lines for leakages, when I suddenly hear this very distinct and horrifying sound that is the CO2 release alarm. For those of you who don't know, it is pretty common to use CO2 to kill fires while on board vessels, because it causes minimal damage to other machinery compared to foam or water. From certain stations on board, there is therefore possible to release an enormous amount of CO2 into specific parts of the ship simply by opening a few valves. The activation of any CO2 system will, however, activate an alarm that rings for about 40 seconds before the release actually happens. This means you have less than a minute to get the hell out, or you will be suffocated very quickly. I've never run faster in my life, up as many stairs as I could manage while counting the seconds in my head and taking one deep breath. Once I got to 35 seconds, I managed to get up and out in about 50 seconds, and realizing soon after that it was a false alarm. Apparently, someone decided it was time to test the alarm and had forgotten to check if anyone was down there. You hear a lot of alarms in your daily life as an engineer on a large vessel, but none of them are quite as terrifying as that one.